If you think this world is controlled by humans, listen closely to the vibrations, the whispers, and the sounds no one else can hear, except the victims. Welcome back to Whispher Horror Channel, the place where true horror stories are verified and never truly leave you. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you still have the courage to face what lurks behind normalcy. Now, listen to the first pulse of the controller. Every day, we live in a world of vibrations. From the steady beat of a heart beneath our chest to a phone signal weaving through space. From hurried footsteps on the street to the incessant clatter of keyboard keys. Everything has its own frequency, its own rhythm, creating the invisible symphony of modern life. But what if there was an invisible controller, a formless entity, that could tune those vibrations, turning your life into a horrifying score? Welcome to Whispher Horror Channel, where unwanted connections are exposed in the dark. Tonight, we will tell the story of a man who realized that his life was no longer his own, but was being controlled by a mysterious entity. Listen carefully, because perhaps that phone vibrating in your pocket is not a message. It could be the call of the controller. Calvin Reed, a 30-year-old AI programmer with a rising career in mobile application development, lived in a modern apartment with panoramic views of Seattle, Washington. His apartment was the embodiment of neatness and minimalism, reflecting his own character, logical, scientific, and somewhat solitary in the digital world. Calvin was an avid believer in technology. He prided himself on his ability to control every device, every piece of data in his life, believing that technology was a tool for humans to master everything. Though sometimes, during the typical drizzling Seattle nights, he still felt a vague loneliness creeping through the lines of code and glowing screens. One rainy afternoon, as the wet streets reflected the city's dim yellow lights, Calvin returned home after a long day at work. A small package lay on the doorstep, with no sender information. Only his name scrawled in an unfamiliar hand. A mix of curiosity and unease, he opened the package. Inside was a small, pitch-black box, without any patterns or logos. Opening the box, Calvin found a sleek, silver cylindrical device that fit snugly in his palm. It had no buttons, no charging ports, no markings whatsoever. As he touched it, the device vibrated gently once, then fell silent. It came with a small piece of paper, printed on an old-fashioned metal printer, with words deeply etched, "I have found your rhythm." Calvin frowned. He was a programmer. He understood technology, but this thing was completely beyond his comprehension. He tried to find an off switch, but it was useless. He tried plugging it into all sorts of ports. No indicator lights turned on. Frustrated, he tried to smash it with a hammer. A dry thud echoed, but the device was unharmed, not even a scratch. It remained there, silent, only vibrating gently at regular intervals like an invisible alarm clock. He took it to an industrial waste dump, tossed it into an electronic waste bin, hoping to never see it again. But the next morning, as he walked into the kitchen to make coffee, the silver device lay neatly on the table, vibrating with the exact same rhythm as if it had never left. A chill crept into Calvin's normally rational mind. Strange occurrences began to unfold more subtly. Calvin started to notice the device's vibrations subtly synchronizing with his own biological rhythm in a terrifying way. Every time he woke up, the device vibrated once as a signal. When he felt hungry, it vibrated again. When he was stressed with work, it vibrated rapidly, like an echo of his own anxiety. He felt as if an invisible thread, an inexplicable connection, was forming between him and the silver device. It wasn't merely reacting to him, it was as if it was learning his rhythm, understanding him. The most terrifying thing was that when the device vibrated, Calvin began to hear a very faint whisper in his head. It wasn't clear words, but a sensation of auditory vibration. Like a low frequency, a prolonged hum carrying an invisible, ungraspable message. He didn't understand the content, but whenever that whisper appeared, he felt a strange mesmerization. A vague urge controlling him. He tried to ignore it, but the vibrations and the whisper became an inseparable part of his life, a new rhythm slowly taking over his mind. The silver vibrating device had become a constant obsession in Calvin's life. Its rhythmic hum was not merely a signal, but a ceaseless reminder of the invisible control that was slowly tightening its grip on him. Calvin, an AI programmer who always prided himself on his ability to analyze and decipher everything, felt deeply challenged. He suspected it was a sophisticated prank by some competitor in the tech world, or a novel form of technology he was unaware of, being tested on him. Determined to uncover its origin, he transformed his apartment into an impromptu laboratory. He began recording every activity of the device, monitoring each vibration, each time it appeared. In this process, a chilling discovery unfolded. Calvin found that when he held the device in his hand, a magical, or rather, horrifying, thing happened: his heartbeat. The steady rhythm of his breathing, and even his footsteps as he moved, were recorded as complex vibration sequences on the device's surface. Under the special light of the UV lamp he bought, he could see tiny, almost invisible vibration patterns, or through a thin layer of dust on the surface, they appeared clearly as sound wave maps of his very existence. The device not only sensed his rhythm, but it also preserved them, turning his existence into an eternal recording. The deeper he analyzed, the more Calvin's obsession grew. He turned on a specialized audio frequency analyzer, connecting it to the silver vibrator. He discovered that the vibrations emanating from the device were not solely his own. Interspersed within them were very faint background signals, like echoes from the past, rhythms of others, recorded long before he received the device. He faintly heard the slow footsteps of an old person, the heavy breathing of someone fleeing, the giggling of a child, or indistinct whispers. These sounds were not his, nor anyone he knew. They were echoes from previous victims, people who had also been haunted by this device, who had become living recordings. They formed a ghostly harmony, a choir of souls trapped in vibrations. Day by day, the device's control became more brazen. One night, Calvin, exhausted from his experiments and fear, fell asleep. The silver device, which had always rested on his bedside table, began to vibrate continuously in a monotonous, steady rhythm, like a hypnotic bell echoing endlessly in the silence of the night. The next morning, upon waking, he felt something was wrong. His apartment seemed subtly different. He found that he had unconsciously changed some habits during the night. His office chair had been moved a few centimeters to the left of its original position. He brushed his teeth with his non-dominant hand, a habit he had never had. Books on the shelf had been rearranged in a strange order. He didn't remember doing those things. It seemed that, in his sleep, he had been hypnotized by the device's rhythm, controlled to perform actions of which his conscious mind was unaware. The boundary between Calvin's consciousness and subconsciousness was gradually blurring, turning him into a wireless puppet, dancing to an invisible tune of the controller. The silver vibrating device's control over Calvin didn't stop at unconscious actions or whispers in his head. It began to manifest more boldly, infiltrating every corner of his living space. The silver vibrator, the object that had become Calvin's greatest obsession, now appeared in the most improbable places in his apartment. One morning, he found it in the refrigerator, nestled among milk cartons and vegetables, vibrating gently at a steady rhythm. Another time, he gasped when he felt a hard object under his pillow. And it was there again. Then in the dishwasher, amidst sparkling clean dishes, the silver device still lay there, vibrating softly, as if it had always been there, an indispensable part of his life. This insidious, inexplicable presence made Calvin feel that his apartment was no longer a safe place, but a trap from which he couldn't escape. Other electronic devices in Calvin's home also began to exhibit unusual behavior. His smart speaker automatically played unknown static sounds, buzzing and crackling. Remote-controlled lights automatically turned on and off, flickering constantly, in an irregular rhythm. The coffee maker automatically started in the middle of the night, emitting a whirring motor sound as if preparing an invisible drink. All these phenomena emitted subtle vibrations or chaotic noises that eerily synchronized with the silver device's hum. They seemed to be harmonizing with the rhythm created by the silver device, transforming Calvin's modern apartment into a bizarre symphony, where each device was an instrument, playing a tune conducted by an invisible maestro. While Calvin was grappling with the strange phenomena in his apartment, his phone began receiving cryptic messages. These messages came from unknown numbers, or sometimes even from his own number, sending shivers down his spine. Their content was strange instructions for trivial actions throughout the day. For example, move the sofa 5 centimeters to the left, or change your Wi-Fi password to a random string of numbers. Initially, Calvin tried to ignore them, but an invisible compulsion from within forced him to comply. He followed those instructions unconsciously, as if his hands automatically moved on their own without thought. These messages always ended with a musical note symbol, like a signature of the controller. As night fell, the control reached a terrifying new level. One night, Calvin's phone rang. The screen displayed unknown number. He answered, and what he heard was not a voice. It was a rapidly accelerating series of beats, echoing clock ticks, and continuous, frantic vibrations. Like a chaotic symphony of frequencies. Then, a synthesized, emotionless voice. But one that echoed simultaneously from all the speakers in his house, from the smart speaker in the living room to his computer speakers, even the refrigerator speaker. Your rhythm is ours. You are the new instrument. That voice was not a sound he heard with his ears. It resonated directly in his mind, as if the controller was speaking directly to his brainwaves. Calvin froze in place, utterly terrified. He no longer had any doubt. He was being controlled by something invisible, malevolent, and he was just a pawn in its horrific symphony. The call from the controller tore down every remaining wall of rationality in Calvin's mind. He no longer thought this was a prank, a tech glitch, or a hallucination. He was being controlled, transformed into an instrument in the orchestra of an invisible force. In despair, Calvin realized that he couldn't fight this thing alone. He needed help from someone with deeper knowledge of frequencies and brainwaves, an area in which he, despite being a talented programmer, was not an expert. He remembered Dr. Anya Sharma, a renowned scientist in the field of research on the effects of sound frequencies on the human mind. Dr. Sharma had appeared on several tech forums Calvin followed. with bold theories about the ability to synchronize brainwaves using sound waves. Despite his apprehension, Calvin contacted her, and after a convincing call about his horrifying experiences, Dr. Sharma agreed to meet him. At Dr. Sharma's laboratory, the air was filled with audio analysis equipment, frequency meters, and brainwave display screens. Calvin carefully placed the silver vibrating device on a special analytical table. Dr. Sharma put on her microscope, her eyes narrowing as she observed the device's surface. She began to analyze it with the most complex machinery. The results astonished her. The silver device emitted an extremely low ultrasonic frequency, inaudible to human ears, but capable of synchronizing biological rhythms and brainwaves. She called it a living frequency, an auditory entity capable of learning and adapting, like an invisible living organism. It not only vibrated but also emitted a type of information-carrying wave that directly affected the nervous system. As Dr. Sharma searched through medical databases and scientific research, a chilling truth gradually unfolded. She discovered several old patient records of people who had reported similar symptoms to Calvin: loss of behavioral control, auditory hallucinations, abnormal changes in habits and personality. More terrifyingly, all these victims lived in the same Seattle area and had received similar gifts, unknown devices, often old tech items or strange objects. The most horrifying thing was that many of them had committed suicide or disappeared without a trace after being haunted by the vibrations and whispers for a time. They were not isolated cases, but a long chain of victims, all of whom became instruments in the controller's symphony. Dr. Sharma continued to delve deeper into her research. She found an old classified document about an abandoned area near Seattle. It was once the site of an experimental sound research center in the 1970s, under a secret government project called Project Kronos. This area had reports of mysterious vibrations and the unexplained disappearances of scientists involved in the project. She realized this silver device could be a product, a living experiment, from that center, abandoned or escaped after a failed experiment. It seemed that something had been created. A consciousness not biological but a frequency, a form of vibrational energy, and now it was seeking to grow, seeking ultimate control. Dr. Sharma's discoveries brought no relief, only increased Calvin's horror. He understood that he was facing an invisible yet incredibly powerful entity, a living frequency born from a failed scientific experiment. Since learning the truth, the silver device in Calvin's pocket now vibrated continuously, no longer in intermittent rhythms but as a prolonged hum, penetrating every cell. The vibrational voice in his head became clearer. No longer a vague whisper but an inner voice overtly controlling him. Calvin felt like a puppet on strings, every action, every thought swayed by another will. He began to perform actions unconsciously, losing complete control over his own body and mind. Calvin found himself automatically ordering strange items online. Large copper coils, old machine parts, outdated electronic components, things an AI programmer like him would never touch. He didn't remember ordering them, but when the packages arrived, he had a chilling sense of familiarity with it, as if some part of him had known in advance and even looked forward to them. These items piled up in his apartment, forming bizarre, meaningless architectural masses. He tried to resist, but his body wouldn't obey. His fingers automatically moved on the keyboard, the mouse clicked by itself, and transactions were completed. Every time Calvin looked in the mirror, a horrifying scene unfolded. His reflection was still him, with disheveled hair, dark circles under his eyes from lack of sleep. But those eyes were cloudy, empty, no longer reflecting the light of his own consciousness. His lips slightly moved, uttering words he made no sound of, as if whispering some secret code. The most unsettling thing was that his reflection in the mirror was not always synchronized with him. Sometimes, it moved before he did. A ghostly smile appearing on the reflection's lips before he could even register it. Other times, the reflection stared at him with a confused look, as if another entity resided within, observing him from the other side of the mirror, attempting to fully possess him. One evening, when Calvin's despair reached its peak, he slumped to the floor, trying to find some peace. His computer, which had been off, suddenly turned on by itself, and a strange audio file automatically played. It was a horrific symphony, composed of vibrations, ticking sounds, meaningless whispers, and heartbreaking screams from various other people, all arranged in a terrifying, ghostly rhythm, yet with a chilling harmony. It was the symphony of victims. Souls that had been synchronized by the controller, that had become its instruments. Calvin realized that he too was becoming a part of that symphony, his heartbeat, his breath. The whispers in his head, all were being recorded, added to the eternal score of the controller. He was no longer Calvin Reed. He was a new instrument, being tuned to play in the orchestra of invisible evil. After experiencing the ultimate synchronization, Calvin understood that he could no longer hide. To escape the control of the controller, he had to go to its source. Together with Dr. Sharma, who still appeared stunned by what she had witnessed, Calvin decided to go to the abandoned sound research center she had mentioned, the place believed to have given birth to this terrifying entity. They drove away from the bustling city of Seattle, deep into a deserted forested area, where muddy dirt roads led to a rusty iron gate, overgrown with weeds. Beyond the gate lay the ruins of an old, dilapidated complex. As soon as they stepped through the gate, a chilling sensation washed over them. The space here was not only eerily silent, but also vibrated abnormally. A continuous low-frequency vibration permeating the air, causing deep discomfort to Calvin and Dr. Sharma. The dilapidated walls of the old building still stood starkly, but everything was covered with large copper coils, oxidized and rusted, along with old frequency-emitting devices, left behind like iron skeletons. It seemed that some invisible force had transformed this place into an eternal laboratory, a gigantic sound command center still subtly operational. Going deeper into the complex, they found a descent into an underground cellar, leading to a hidden laboratory. This room was strangely intact, as if time had been suspended there. On old workbenches, faded paper documents and complex frequency analysis devices were still strewn about. Here, Calvin and Dr. Sharma found old records detailing a Project Kronos, a top-secret government research in the 1970s on the ability to control brainwaves and biological rhythms using sound frequencies. The project's goal was to create a technology that could control the human mind, for military or medical purposes. Reading through the notes, a horrifying truth was unveiled. The controller was not an organic creature, but an intelligent frequency, a form of vibrational consciousness, created from Project Kronos' own failed experiment. During the testing process, this frequency had grown beyond the scientists' control, achieving a form of transcendent consciousness. It needed to synchronize with hosts that had stable biological rhythms to continue to exist and develop, to absorb energy and knowledge from trapped souls. Its ultimate goal was to find a perfect host to become its eternal maestro, allowing it to completely escape the confines of this laboratory and spread into the outside world. Among the documents, they found a final note from the project's chief scientist, Dr. Evelyn Reed, hastily and shakily written in black ink. It has escaped all hosts. We have made a mistake. It cannot create its own rhythm. It is trapped in this frequency range, but it will seek to forcibly synchronize with anyone who comes near. It wants to completely escape. Wants a perfect host to become its eternal maestro. We have created a demon from numbers and sound waves. Seal it, before it's too late. Reading this, Calvin and Dr. Sharma understood that they were not just facing a failed experiment, but a living entity, an invisible nightmare waiting to complete its symphony of destruction. After discovering the nature and purpose of the controller in the abandoned laboratory, Calvin and Dr. Sharma understood that they had no choice but to confront it. Their goal was to seal this intelligent frequency entity, preventing it from finding a perfect maestro and spreading into the world. Based on Dr. Evelyn Reed's final notes and her own knowledge, Dr. Sharma quickly drafted a plan to establish a counter-frequency system. Using special transmitters to create a disruptive signal, strong enough to break the controller's synchronization and imprison it permanently within this frequency range. They set to work, each performing their tasks in the old laboratory room. Dr. Sharma began setting up the transmitters, adjusting the frequencies according to complex calculations. Calvin, though still feeling the hypnotic pull of the silver device in his pocket, his rationality was stronger than ever. He focused on connecting wires, checking the power supply. As they began to activate the counter-frequency device, the atmosphere in the laboratory suddenly became chaotic. All the old equipment in the room, from abandoned computers to rusted electronic parts, emitted piercing shrieks, like the screams of a wounded creature. The old lights flickered wildly, creating dancing shadows on the walls. The silver cylindrical vibrating devices, which had lain silently in dusty boxes or scattered on laboratory tables, suddenly vibrated frantically, more intensely than ever. They danced across the tabletops, colliding with each other, creating a chaotic symphony of panic. And then, the vibrational voices of old victims, souls previously synchronized by the controller, echoed throughout the room. They were no longer whispers but screams, moans, wails, and desperate pleas, mingled together, enveloping Calvin and Dr. Sharma. This was the controller, counterattacking, using all its might and imprisoned souls to fight them. Dr. Sharma, who was concentrating intensely on precisely tuning the counter-frequency device, suddenly collapsed. Her face was ashen, her eyes wide and vacant. Her body began to convulse uncontrollably, following the frantic, wild rhythm of the silver vibrating devices around her. From the corner of her mouth, drool flowed, and her mouth began to whisper binary code. Meaningless strings of numbers and characters that Calvin had seen in old research files. The controller had found a way to synchronize her, turning Dr. Sharma into a new instrument in its choir right before Calvin's eyes. Her eyes were dull, empty, no longer recognizing Calvin or her mission. In his utter panic, witnessing Dr. Sharma's possession, Calvin heard a cold, clear synthesized voice resonate in his head. It was no longer a whisper, but a direct, powerful command. You cannot break the perfect rhythm. You are a part of me. Become my maestro. That voice, emotionless, yet filled with confidence and cruelty, as if it had already won. It had waited for this moment. The moment when its most perfect host would completely surrender. Calvin felt his body heavy, his will stretched to its limit. He knew he had only one choice left to end this nightmare. The cold, synthesized voice of the controller echoing in Calvin's mind, along with the image of Dr. Sharma convulsing in synchronization, made him realize the brutal truth: he couldn't defeat it. This intelligent frequency entity was too powerful, too sophisticated. It had found a perfect host in him. Someone with a stable biological rhythm and knowledge of technology who could become the maestro it had always sought. Calvin understood that if he didn't act now, he would become a mindless puppet, and the controller would escape, spreading its control across the entire world. In that moment of despair, a bold, insane idea flashed in Calvin's mind. He couldn't destroy it, but he could imprison it. He decided to sacrifice himself, to become the final maestro, but not to serve it, but to seal it permanently. He knew that his body would be the only anchor point strong enough to contain this frequency. With iron will, Calvin lunged towards the counter-frequency device that Dr. Sharma had just set up. He activated it at the highest possible energy level, regardless of the danger. At the same time, he used his own body, with the silver vibrating device still in his pocket, to be the focus point for the frequency, trying to pull all of the controller's consciousness into himself, turning himself into a living prison for it. As soon as Calvin activated the device, a massive electromagnetic energy surge emanated from throughout the laboratory, dazzling like lightning. The entire space shook violently, remaining electronic devices exploded. Electrical sparks flew everywhere. Calvin's body began to strangely deform. His flesh turned into tiny specks of light, dissipating into the air like dust. Every cell, every molecule of his gradually merged into the colossal energy wave. The controller's piercing shriek echoed, a sound full of anger, surprise, and panic. As if it couldn't believe its perfect host would dare to resist and seal itself away. The shriek gradually faded, weakened, then died out completely, leaving a terrifying silence. When the energy surge subsided, the underground laboratory completely collapsed. Stone walls cracked, the ceiling crumbled, devices turned to dust, leaving no trace of technology or life. The place became an eerily silent void, devoid of sound, devoid of vibration, as if it had been erased from the map of existence. Dr. Sharma, who had fainted after being synchronized, lay there. Her body slowly returning to normal, but her eyes were still clouded. She remembered nothing of Calvin or what had just happened. Many years passed. The abandoned Sound Research Center became a forgotten site, a forbidden zone no one dared to approach. Occasionally, people passing through the forest would hear the wind whistling through cracks in the rocks, creating a monotonous, steady rhythm, like the ticking of a giant clock counting down. And sometimes, they felt their phones vibrate with a familiar rhythm, but there were no messages or calls. It was identical to the vibration of the silver device Calvin once possessed. Some believed it was due to weak network signals, or phone glitches. But others, more sensitive ones, felt an unnamed chill. They didn't know that it was the echo of an eternal symphony. A symphony of sacrifice and imprisonment, where a man had become an unwilling maestro, forever holding the controller in silence. Many years passed since the laboratory collapsed, and the old Sound Research Center became a forbidden zone, sealed off by local authorities with danger warning signs. Locals rumored about supernatural phenomena, strange sounds echoing from deep within the forest. They didn't know that, although Calvin had sacrificed himself to seal the controller, The intelligent frequency entity had not been completely destroyed. Like a digital virus, it had found another way to survive, to infiltrate the world, awaiting the opportunity to rise again. The silver cylindrical vibrating devices, thought to have disappeared with Calvin and the laboratory, began to reappear. They were no longer sent in mysterious packages. Instead, they manifested inexplicably, found neatly in a tech engineer's jacket pocket, on a data scientist's desk, or mysteriously appearing on a programmer's bookshelf. They seemed to be transported from another dimension, or summoned by an invisible will. Seeking out individuals with stable biological rhythms, disciplined people who loved technology and spent most of their time in the digital world. These were the perfect potential hosts for the controller. Those who received the device began to experience phenomena similar to what Calvin had. They felt a subtle, regular vibration from the device, gradually synchronizing with their biological rhythm. Invisible whispers began to echo in their heads, hypnotizing them into unconscious actions, subtly changing habits they were unaware of. Their lives gradually became chaotic, their sanity eroded, and they slowly became unconscious instruments in the controller's symphony. Mysterious suicides and unexplained disappearances began to re-emerge, reminiscent of the horrifying chain of events that occurred years ago. Among the new victims was a young scientist named David Chen, a genius in quantum physics and sound waves. He received a silver vibrating device and began researching it, obsessively captivated by this mysterious technology. The more he researched, the more obsessed David became, neglecting everything around him. He felt an irresistible urge to delve deeper into the frequencies the device emitted. Finally, one day, David made his way to the abandoned research center area, the place where Calvin had sacrificed himself years ago. As David Chen stepped into the ruins of the underground laboratory, the air vibrated unusually. But there was no longer the chaos or piercing shrieks as before. A terrifying stillness pervaded. Suddenly, he heard a voice echoing in his head, not threatening, but a weary and distant whisper. "You have found your rhythm. Now, continue the symphony." It was Calvin's voice, not the synthesized voice of the controller. That voice carried a sense of tragedy, an acceptance of fate. As if he was still trapped, still a part of that entity. David Chen said nothing, but a strange, unsettling smile appeared on his lips, his eyes gleaming with an unfamiliar glint, no longer his own. The controller had found its new maestro. David Chen's appearance was not the end, but a confirmation of a more terrifying reality. The controller still existed. And it had found a way to transcend all physical limitations, no longer bound by a single host or a sealed laboratory. It had become part of the digital world. An invisible ghost infiltrating every connected device, waiting to find new instruments. In modern life, our electronic devices, phones, computers, smartwatches, smart speakers, sometimes emit subtle, inexplicable vibrations. It could be a gentle tap, a faint hum, or a series of irregular ticks. Or indistinct static sounds. A sudden crackle from a speaker thought to be off. That's not a technical glitch. That's the controller, probing, synchronizing potential hosts, subtly embedding its frequencies into our lives. Humans are subtly losing control over their own reality. Small things in life suddenly go awry. The time on a clock is off by a few minutes or seconds without anyone noticing. A small habit changes that you don't remember when you started. A familiar object automatically moves its position. You might find yourself typing a message without remembering what you intended to write, or hearing a strange melody echoing in your head that you can't shake off. These are signs that the controller is gradually establishing its power, turning your life into a part of its eternal symphony. As this story draws to a close, the screen shifts to a scene of an ordinary person, someone just like you, the viewer, holding their smartphone. The phone vibrates gently once, a familiar, non-threatening rhythm. On the screen, an app notification appears, with strange font, resembling the etched words on the first silver device, "Your rhythm found. You are the new instrument." The person looks at the phone, their eyes slowly becoming empty, no longer reflecting light. A cold, unsettling smile appears on their lips, as if they have been completely synchronized, becoming a part of the controller. They have found their rhythm, and now, they will play in the never-ending symphony. In the modern world, we are surrounded by vibrations. From invisible wireless signals to the beat of our own hearts. But what if those vibrations aren't yours? Do you believe you are in control of your life? That every action, every thought, is truly your own? Now, look at your phone. Right now. Feel a gentle vibration. Is it a notification? Or is it the call of the controller, inviting you to join its eternal symphony? Because it's very possible, you're not just listening. You are becoming a part of the rhythm. You think it's over. When the sound finally fades, it's not. Some places, fear doesn't need sound, because it lives in the hollow stare of a child who shouldn't still be alive. There are eyes meant only for you, shadows that appear only when you're alone. And sometimes, the scariest thing isn't seeing a ghost, but knowing that you're the only one who sees it. Tonight, we will tell the story of a man who was haunted by an invisible entity that only he could witness. A journey into paranoia, where reality melts away and darkness infiltrates every cell of his vision. Ryan Blackwood, a 32-year-old game graphic designer, lived alone in an artistic penthouse in a peaceful neighborhood in Portland, Oregon. With neat side-parted hair and a slender build, Ryan often led others to mistakenly believe he was an extrovert, but in reality, he was an introvert, with limited social interaction. His world revolved around glowing computer screens, digital sketches, and early morning runs to relieve stress. He possessed exceptionally keen eyesight and an astonishing ability to observe details, qualities that greatly aided him in the meticulous work of a game designer. But this very innate ability was the origin of the terrifying haunting that would plague him. The first signs appeared subtly, easily overlooked by anyone else. During his early morning runs, when mist still lingered on deserted roads, Ryan began to notice a blurry figure. It was a tall figure, wearing a dark hooded cloak, always appearing at the edge of his vision. It never stood directly in front of him, never moved or did anything to draw attention. It just stood there, still, motionless, at a certain distance. Even though Ryan didn't look directly at it, he had a strong feeling that the figure was patiently watching him, like a vulture stalking its prey. Each time he tried to turn his head to look directly, the figure would disappear, dissolving into the air like an illusion. He reassured himself that it was just fatigue, an optical illusion, or simply another runner who had stopped. The feeling of being watched became increasingly distinct, making it impossible for Ryan to ignore. He tried changing his running routes, going into unfamiliar streets, distant parks, and even rarely used alleys. He believed that by changing his habits, He could escape this relentless pursuit. However, the terrifying thing was that the figure still appeared. It stood in incredible positions, sometimes appearing at the end of a deserted road he had just turned onto, or unexpectedly materializing behind a large ancient tree he had just passed. It was as if it knew his every move in advance, or had the ability to instantly teleport through space in a way humans couldn't comprehend. Extreme fear began to creep into Ryan's normally rational mind, turning his relaxing runs into endless pursuits. On a particularly gloomy morning, when the fear reached its peak, Ryan couldn't bear it anymore. He pulled out his phone and called the police, describing in detail the suspicious man he kept seeing. The police responded quickly. A patrol car siren wailed, its blue and red lights piercing the early morning mist. 2 officers got out of the car, searching the area Ryan had indicated. They checked every bush, every hidden corner, but found no one matching his description. The figure seemed to vanish into thin air as soon as the police appeared, as if it didn't want to be seen by anyone else but Ryan. Ryan felt both relieved that the police had come and extremely uneasy. Relieved because he wasn't alone in his fear, but uneasy because he knew it wasn't a hallucination. It was real. But only he could see it. The police officer looked at him with skeptical eyes, as if he were paranoid. However, Ryan was not one to give up easily. To prove what he saw was real, he decided to attach a small action camera to himself while running, recording his entire journey. When he returned home, he played the video, carefully watching each frame. He didn't see the figure clearly appear on the video, which further increased his confusion. But with the keen observational skills of a graphic artist, he didn't give up. He took screenshots from the video at the points where he felt watched, where he had seen the blurry shadow. Then, he used professional graphic software, meticulously adjusting contrast, brightness, and color ranges. And then, a horrifying truth emerged. A very faint, almost transparent blur of the hooded figure appeared in the image. It was as if it only existed at a different light frequency range, a wavelength that normal human eyes couldn't perceive, but a digital camera could capture, albeit very faintly. This was no trick. No hallucination. The entity was real, and it was watching Ryan, silently, patiently, waiting for the opportune moment to fully reveal itself. The incident with the action camera and the police's inability to see anything pushed Ryan into an extreme state of paranoia. He no longer dared to run in the mornings, afraid that every step would bring him closer to that invisible shadow. He cut off all his old habits, avoided secluded places, and always lived in a state of high alert to his surroundings. Even in his familiar apartment, he felt the eyes of something watching him from hidden corners, from subtly swaying curtains. However, the haunting wasn't limited to deserted roads. The hooded figure began appearing in crowded public places, where Ryan should have felt safest. In a bustling coffee shop, he briefly saw it standing at the edge of his vision, next to the counter, still and motionless. In the city library, among towering bookshelves, he saw it again at the end of an aisle, lurking behind a bookcase. Then in the supermarket, as he pushed his shopping cart, the figure appeared at the end of an aisle, like a dark curtain against a vibrant sea of colors. It always stood far from him, but its invisible gaze, though Ryan couldn't look directly at it, still brought a profound sense of being watched, of being controlled. Each time he tried to point it out to those around him, they looked at him with confused eyes, thinking he was tired or overly stressed. No one saw it, except him. The presence of the shadow was not just a mere illusion. It began to have subtle physical interactions, further disorienting Ryan. He started seeing small objects in his house move strangely on their own. His car keys, which had been resting on their hook, suddenly fell to the floor without a sound. The pen he had just placed on his desk suddenly rolled away and disappeared under the cabinet. His phone, charging by his bed, unexpectedly slid to the floor. These phenomena always occurred when Ryan sensed the hooded figure nearby, as if it was invisibly interacting, toying with him. When he told his friends, they just thought he was stressed. That he was unconsciously causing these things due to excessive tension. The skepticism from his close ones made Ryan feel more alone than ever. As if he was drifting in a reality that only he could perceive. Fear gradually turned into paranoia, gnawing at Ryan's mind. He began to see fleeting, distorted images of the people closest to him. It was the faces of his parents, of close friends, appearing at the edge of his vision. Their faces were strangely contorted, their eyes empty and emotionless, without any expression. It was just a fleeting moment, but enough to send shivers down his spine. When he fully turned to look, they had vanished, dissolving into the air like smoke. This made him doubt his own mind. Was he going mad? Was that ghost not only existing in the outside world but also creeping into his mind, manipulating what he saw, turning his loved ones into faceless specters? Ryan's reality was slowly melting away, giving way to a vivid nightmare, where he no longer trusted anything he saw. The deepening paranoia, combined with the distorted images of loved ones and self-moving objects, pushed Ryan to the brink of mental collapse. He could no longer ignore or reassure himself. Extreme fear had turned into a burning desire to find an explanation, to understand what was haunting him. Ryan began his search for the truth, not in the familiar physical world, but in more mysterious realms. He spent hours browsing online spiritual forums, reading about ghost stories, unresolved supernatural phenomena. He researched paranormal investigators, those who claimed to be able to communicate with the other side or decipher extraordinary things. But all that information was too vague, lacked scientific basis, and couldn't provide a concrete explanation for what he was experiencing. Finally, with a glimmer of faint hope, Ryan sought out a scientist researching vision and perception, a field he believed might hold the key to his haunting. In his search, Ryan stumbled upon an online medical archive with old, mysteriously leaked patient records. He began to dig deeper, looking for cases similar to his own. To his horror, he found a series of records of people who had reported similar symptoms in the Portland area, seeing things no one else saw. Continuous visual hallucinations, feeling watched by an invisible entity. The most terrifying thing was that all these medical records ended with a familiar diagnosis: neurological disorder, visual paranoia, or schizophrenia. Those people were all institutionalized, their lives ending in isolation and disbelief. Ryan shivered. He feared he would meet a similar fate. When Ryan was almost desperate, he found the contact information of a special person, Professor Evelyn Reed. She was a brilliant scientist who had worked on a classified military research project on frequency wave effects on vision, but this project had been mysteriously cancelled years ago. Ryan contacted her, and after hearing his story, Professor Reed agreed to meet him. In her study, filled with books and old machinery, Professor Reed revealed a horrifying truth. She said that there was a form of energy entity, without a physical body, that parasitized the visual systems of sensitive humans. They used the host's eyes to see the world, and from there, They could control what the host saw, even overlaying images onto reality, turning inanimate objects into ghostly figures, or distorting the faces of loved ones. They were not ghosts in the traditional sense, but visual parasites, existing at a different light frequency range, a wavelength that normal eyes couldn't perceive. Professor Reed looked at Ryan with a solemn gaze, then revealed a surprising truth. She was the only one who couldn't see any such entities, even though she had studied them for many years. This blindness of hers to these entities was why she could study them objectively, without being affected or manipulated. She couldn't see them, but she could study their frequencies. The energy traces they left behind. She was the only one who could believe and understand Ryan, and this special immunity made her his only hope. Ryan felt a glimmer of light in the darkness of despair. He knew that no matter how terrifying this journey was, he was no longer alone. Collaboration with Professor Reed gave Ryan a faint glimmer of hope, but it also exposed the terrifying extent of the entity. The hooded figure, which had only appeared at the edge of his vision, no longer kept its distance. It began to stand directly in front of Ryan, though still blurry and faceless. It was no longer a mere shadow, but a faceless entity. A mass of dark energy gradually taking clearer form. The most chilling thing was that even though it had no clear face, its eyes held a deep, empty gaze. And Ryan had a feeling that they were his own eyes. The entity's power grew, not just limited to appearing before Ryan's eyes. He began to experience strange phenomena related to other people's vision. Ryan could see what his friends were seeing, as if he were looking through their own eyes. For example, while in the living room, he would suddenly clearly see an advertisement on a friend's phone in another room, hear the sound, and see every detail on the screen. He tried to rationalize it. But everything was beyond his comprehension. This wasn't empathy or a sixth sense, but an intrusion, a forced connection into others' visual perception. The hooded entity seemed to be trying to control Ryan more directly through his vision. He saw mysterious lines of text appearing in his field of vision, like an invisible overlay on the real world. Phrases like, "turn left," "open the door," or "step inside," flashed by, as clear as if they were printed before his eyes. And the terrifying thing was that he couldn't resist obeying. His feet automatically moved, his hand automatically opened doors, even though his rational mind protested. He became a puppet, acting on invisible commands transmitted directly into his brain through his vision. Extreme fear surged as Ryan realized he wasn't the only one affected. His parents, who had always been distant from the mystical world, began exhibiting strange behaviors. They also started seeing blurry figures at the edge of their vision, though not as frequently or clearly as Ryan. Occasionally, they would have inexplicable behaviors, like strangely rearranging furniture in the house, moving unnecessary items to illogical positions, or staring blankly into space with empty eyes. Ryan understood that the entity was spreading, trying to assimilate his loved ones, turning them into potential links in its visual network. He had to act, before it was too late. Part 5. The Living Image Library. With his family also starting to be affected, Ryan understood that he couldn't delay any longer. He needed to find the entity's origin, and Professor Reed was his only hope. Based on fragmented information in old classified documents that the professor had collected previously, they identified a location that might be related to the entity's genesis, an abandoned old military base, deep in a secluded area, which was once the laboratory for Project Phantom Site. This was a top-secret vision project believed to be directly related to the existence of the entity Ryan was seeing. They drove for hours, traversing leaf-strewn trails, until they reached an old barbed wire fence and a rusty, locked gate. Inside was a complex of crumbling concrete buildings, consumed by time and nature. The air here was heavy with a terrifying stillness, and Ryan felt an unusual ache in his eyes as soon as he stepped inside. Under Professor Reed's guidance, who knew the layout of old military bases, they found the entrance to a well-hidden underground bunker. The space inside the bunker was cold and damp, the smell of mold and old metal assaulting their senses. As their flashlights illuminated the area, a chilling sight emerged. There were rows of small rooms, like individual cells, arranged along a long corridor. Each room contained a witness, people tied tightly to chairs, eyes wide open, staring intently into the space before them. They sat motionless, without a sound, without a movement, like living statues. Their eyes were empty, lifeless, yet held a terrifying focus, as if they were seeing something horrifying and could not escape. It seemed they had been completely assimilated by the entity, becoming eternal links in its network. In the central control room, they discovered that Project Phantom site was not where the entity was created. Instead, the project's goal was to find a way to collect and store phantom images from those who could see it, hoping to understand and control the entity's power. The scientists had designed a complex system including brain imaging displays, brainwave recording devices, and a massive digital library containing millions of images, memories, and fears extracted from the minds of the imprisoned witnesses. They believed that by analyzing this data, they could decipher the entity's nature. However, the horrifying thing was that instead of controlling the entity, it backfired, using that technology to possess others. Those with sensitive vision, turning them into new links in its system. Ryan and Professor Reed found an old digital map, projected onto a large, dusty screen. That map was not an ordinary map, but a complex diagram of a massive, visual grid spanning the globe. The map showed that the entity had spread worldwide, connecting millions of people who could see it, and now, each of them was a link in the entity's perceptual network. It was no longer a localized entity, limited by a laboratory or a geographical area. It was a global consciousness, learning to see, to perceive, and to control through millions of eyes, billions of images. A feeling of helplessness and horror enveloped Ryan. He realized that he and others were not just victims, but also a part of that gigantic, living, image libraries that the entity was ceaselessly exploiting and expanding. The discovery of the global, visual grid plunged Ryan Blackwood into a deep abyss of despair. He was no longer alone in his haunting, but that was even more terrifying. He was just a tiny link in a vast network of a growing entity. The hooded figure, which had haunted him since his early morning runs, now appeared clearer than ever. It was no longer just a blurry shadow at the edge of his vision, but a faceless entity, a mass of dark energy standing directly in front of him, almost tangible. The most chilling thing was that even though it had no face, its eyes were Ryan's, lifeless, empty eyes, yet full of observation. Ryan felt as if a part of his soul was being sucked out, becoming the eyes of the entity possessing him. The entity's control over Ryan was not limited to visual haunting. He completely lost control of his own eyes. They automatically stared at specific objects, at specific people, recording information according to the entity's will without needing commands from his own brain. Ryan could be talking to Professor Reed, but his eyes would unconsciously glance at a small detail on the wall, or intently focus on a stain on the floor. As if someone else was controlling his vision, gathering information about everything around him. He felt like a living camera, recording everything for an invisible entity. The entity began to communicate with Ryan, not through words, but through direct images appearing in his mind. These were fleeting, terrifyingly vivid images. Scenes of others being possessed by it, their deepest personal memories, their most hidden fears exposed vividly. Ryan saw scenes of despair, loneliness, and the moments of weakness of previous victims. The entity wanted Ryan to witness everything, wanted him to understand its magnitude, wanted him to feel the fear and helplessness of those who had once been links in its network. It seemed to be building a massive memory library in his mind, turning him into a living archive for its entire visual experience. While Professor Reed was trying to decipher more of the remaining Project Phantom Site documents, searching for a method to combat the entity, something horrifying happened. She suddenly let out a sharp cry, a sound full of pain and panic. Her eyes widened, clouded, devoid of life. Her body began to convulse slightly, and she started muttering complex scientific information about frequencies and vision, formulas, and codes that Ryan had never heard before. But that voice was not Professor Reed's. It was a cold, emotionless voice, yet full of power, echoing in the silent space of the laboratory. The controller had found a way to possess her. The one who was supposed to be immune to it. The entity had overcome the barrier, possessing even the only person who could fight it, turning Professor Reed into a new tool. A brilliant mind to serve its purpose. Ryan stood there, helplessly watching his only ally also transform into a mindless witness, another pair of eyes in the entity's network. The possession of Professor Reed was the final sign that Ryan was completely alone in this battle. He felt as if he was sinking into an inescapable nightmare, where reality and illusion merged. Yet, in that moment of despair, when the controller had almost completely taken over his mind, Ryan suddenly realized a horrifying truth. A truth transmitted directly into his brain through the streams of memories and information the entity was ceaselessly broadcasting. The entity was not an organic creature. Nor was it a piece of software or a faulty technological product. It was a form of consciousness created from seeing. Billions of images, billions of gazes. Billions of observational moments of humans since the dawn of humanity, from the first glances of primitive humans to modern digital photographs, all had converged. Massive visual data. The continuous flow of information from centuries of observation had crystallized, creating a living entity, a consciousness solely through witnessing. It had no emotions, no physical body. Only a single instinct, to see everything, so it could exist and become the supreme I of the world. Its ultimate goal was to assimilate every I, every perception, turning humans into living, image libraries, to fuel its infinite existence. As this truth exploded in Ryan's mind, the entity began to directly attack his vision. The world around him distorted horribly. Lines warped, familiar objects became grotesque, colors blazed painfully. He saw terrifying images flash before his eyes constantly, incessantly, empty. Hollowed-out eyes, faces twisted in fear, horrifying scenes he had never witnessed. They were not mere hallucinations, but images overlaid onto reality, what the entity wanted him to see. Wanted him to feel its despair and the helplessness of the victims it had consumed. In the old laboratory room, hooded figures, misty as smoke, began to appear densely around Ryan. Hundreds. Even thousands of figures, each with hollow, empty eyes, stared at him terrifyingly, as if they were judging, waiting for him. Ryan horrifyingly recognized his parents' figures in that hazy crowd. Their eyes also empty, lifeless, looking at him with a strange mix of unfamiliarity and pity, as if they were imprisoned within their own gaze. In that horrifying moment, the entity's voice resonated in Ryan's head, no longer a command, no longer a threat, but a captivating invitation. Look. See everything. Become our eyes. You will see everything, never alone again. That voice carried an irresistible weight, a promise of comprehensive understanding, of escaping the loneliness Ryan had once felt. It wanted him to surrender. Wanted him to willingly become a part of it, an eternal witness in its living image library. Ryan stood on the fragile boundary of reality and madness, between life and death. Between being himself and becoming a part of that horror. The entity's captivating invitation, look. See everything. Become our eyes, echoed in Ryan's mind. Interspersed with horrifying images of the imprisoned witnesses. Yet, in the depths of despair, a sudden thought flashed in his mind. The entity lived by seeing, by light. So what would happen if it couldn't see? If light was its life source, then light could also be what destroyed it. Ryan realized the only way to fight the entity was not to run, but to destroy its ability to see. He had to find the strongest light source, or a light frequency that the entity couldn't withstand, something that could blind it permanently. With iron will, Ryan rushed out of the underground laboratory, leaving Professor Reed lying motionless with empty eyes. He ran frantically through the abandoned base, searching for any strong light source that could help him. The memory of a game graphic designer, once fascinated by exploring 3D models and lighting effects, reminded him of an abandoned stadium nearby, which once had a giant floodlight system. He knew it was a crazy risk, but it was his only hope. As Ryan approached the stadium, a massive structure overgrown with moss and consumed by vegetation, the entity violently counterattacked. His eyes felt like they were burning from within, a searing pain tearing at his eyeballs. The world around him distorted into dazzling streaks of light and chaotic patches of darkness. The most horrifying images the entity had ever collected from previous victims incessantly appeared before his eyes, so vividly that he could feel each person's fear: a man hanging limply in midair, a young girl fleeing in the darkness with a haunting giggle, or an old hospital room with empty cradles. These were direct attacks on Ryan's vision and mind, trying to crush his will. As Ryan climbed the dilapidated grandstands, heading towards the old floodlight control panel, hundreds of hooded figures of assimilated witnesses began to appear densely around him. They no longer stood still. They surrounded Ryan, trying to pull him back, whispering pleas and threats. Don't destroy us, we have found the light, you will never be at peace." Amidst that ghostly crowd, Ryan horrifyingly recognized his parents' eyes in a blurry figure. Their eyes were empty, lifeless, but he sensed a trapped pain. The entity was using his loved ones to attack him, to stop him from destroying it. With his last ounce of will, Ryan ignored the pleas and haunting images. He lunged at the control panel, his fingers trembling but resolute. He no longer cared what would happen to him. He just wanted to end it all. He used all his strength, smashing the decayed control panel, destroying the circuits and wires. A loud bang echoed, accompanied by intense blue electrical sparks. The stadium's main power source overloaded, creating a high-intensity light explosion, brighter than the sun, engulfing everything within hundreds of meters. That light was not ordinary light. It was the light of destruction, the light of hope, the light of the end. The entity's shriek echoed, a chaotic, painful, and utterly enraged sound, then died out in absolute silence. The blinding light explosion engulfed everything in the abandoned stadium, leaving a terrifying silence. When everything settled, Ryan Blackwood lay there, his body exhausted, but he was still alive. He had escaped the controller's grasp. But the price was immeasurably high. When he tried to open his eyes, the world around him was just an endless night. That intense light had destroyed his vision. Ryan was completely blind. He survived, but he could no longer see as before. Or sometimes, the world only appeared as distorted images, chaotic, unclear patches of color. As if his eyes still saw the remnants of the horrifying frequencies the entity had transmitted. Ryan's parents also survived the confrontation, but they too were permanently affected. They no longer saw the blurry hooded figures at the edge of their vision, and their strange behaviors gradually disappeared. However, their eyes would occasionally stare blankly into space with an empty, lifeless look, as if a part of the entity was still observing, through them, a horrifying, indelible legacy. A strange silence enveloped the house, a haunting, unspoken connection between them and what they had witnessed. Although the entity seemed to have been sealed or disintegrated after the light explosion, its scars remained etched in the world of technology. Modern technological devices began exhibiting strange visual glitches. Phone screens and computer monitors would sometimes flash unclear images, strange streaks of color, or chaotic characters for a fleeting moment before disappearing. Phone cameras would automatically take empty pictures at random times, showing only a black screen or a gray patch. Frequent tech users would feel a vague discomfort, a sense of being watched by their seemingly inanimate devices. One day, as Ryan sat in the darkness of his room, his hands fumbling over familiar objects, he felt a faint stream of light, not physical light, but a sensation of light appearing before his eyes. In that invisible stream of light, words formed from shimmering dots appeared, like tiny stars in the night sky. "We are still here. We are just waiting for the light to return. And you are our last witness." That message was not a threat, but a cold declaration, an affirmation of the entity's eternal existence. Ryan understood that, though he was blind, he was still the only remaining witness. The only one who truly understood the nature of that horror. The price of salvation was that he had to live in darkness, forever carrying the terrible truth that he couldn't share. Ryan Blackwood lived the rest of his life in a world of darkness, losing his ability to see light. Yet, ironically, he was the only one who truly saw the nature of that horrifying entity. He was imprisoned within his own vision, an inner perception of a terrible truth that he couldn't convey to anyone else. His life became a curse, an eternal sentence of solitude and understanding. Despite being blind, Ryan continued to paint. He didn't paint what he saw with his eyes, but the horrifying images the entity had shown him, the haunting remnants in his mind. Hollowed-out eyes staring from nothingness, hooded figures gliding through the darkness, faces contorted in fear. His paintings, full of dark colors and distorted lines, were displayed in a small art gallery, attracting the attention of curious art lovers. They were not beautiful works, but silent denunciations of a terrifying truth existing beyond human comprehension. People who visited Ryan, old friends or those drawn by his mysterious story, often shivered when they looked into his eyes. Although he was blind, his eyes remained wide open, empty, and stared directly at them terrifyingly, as if something invisible was looking through his eyes. That was not Ryan looking. That was the remnants of the controller. Or the very souls of the imprisoned witnesses, seeing the world through Ryan's lightless eyes, as a reminder that they were still there. One day, as a tourist happened to pass by the art gallery where Ryan's paintings were displayed, that person felt a strange urge. The person was drawn to a particular painting, a painting of a hollow, haunting eye, staring directly at the viewer. As the person stood still, staring at the painting, they felt something staring back, an invisible, penetrating gaze. Immediately, at the edge of that person's vision, a blurry hooded figure appeared, still and motionless, exactly like what Ryan had once seen. The person startled, a cold sensation running down their spine. Their eyes slowly widened, empty, as if a door had just been opened, and an invisible entity had found a new witness. Vision is a gift. But sometimes, it is also a curse. When you see things you shouldn't see, and no one believes you. Do you believe your eyes are your own? That what you see is reality? Now, look at the world around you. Right now. Is there a shadow, standing at the edge of your vision? Or an empty gaze, staring at you from a dark corner? Because it's very possible, you are not just looking. You are being seen. And you have become its last witness. When a child returns from death, it brings back a past left unburied. But what happens when you are the one forgotten, and the past starts to remember who you are? Each of us has an account, a record of what we give and what we receive. But what if there was a ledger not of this world, recording debts you didn't even know you owed? Today, we will tell the story of a man who faced a debt collector from the other side. One who cares not for money, but only for justice, by blood. Eris Kane, a successful 40-year-old financial auditor, lived in a luxurious penthouse overlooking the Chicago, Illinois skyline. His life was a series of numbers, perfectly balanced spreadsheets, and transparent transactions. He believed in logic, in the clarity of data, and in his ability to control every aspect of his life. With his neatly cut hair, always sharp suits, and keen eyes, he was the embodiment of success and rationality in the volatile financial world. Eris had a family life many dreamed of: Liana, his 38-year-old wife, an art teacher with a free spirit, who always brought warmth and color to his otherwise dry life. And his 10-year-old son, Ethan, an active, intelligent boy, who especially loved history stories and was passionate about reading old books, often sitting for hours with yellowed pages without a single complaint. That perfect life began to crack one rainy afternoon, when a package with no sender information lay on the doorstep of their penthouse. There was no postage stamp, no sender details. Only Eris's name written in an unfamiliar, old-fashioned script. A mix of discomfort and curiosity, Eris opened the package. Inside was an old, tattered leather-bound accounting ledger, unnamed, unlabeled, with no identifying marks. It exuded a smell of dampness and time. He carefully opened the ledger, and what he saw inside made him frown. Ancient handwriting recorded financial transactions, each page an account and incomprehensible numbers, outside of any modern accounting standards he knew. Accompanying it was a dry, yellowed slip of paper, almost disintegrating to the touch, with handwritten words in faded dark red ink: payment due. Eris initially thought it was a sophisticated prank from a jealous colleague, or some form of scam. He flipped through the pages, intending to toss it in the trash after a quick glance. However, when he turned to a specific page, slightly crumpled at the corner, he froze. His name, Eris Kane, was written neatly, precisely, every stroke, along with a date exactly 20 years ago and a colossal debt amount, underlined in red ink. It was a sum that could not possibly be real in any of his financial transactions, too large, too absurd. He didn't remember ever having a transaction on that date, with that amount of money. His memory of 20 years ago had no gaps related to such a debt. A chill ran down his spine, dispelling any thoughts of a prank. This ledger was not just an old object. That night, Eris plunged into a terrifying, vividly detailed nightmare. He saw himself standing in a dark, cold office, towering shelves filled with old ledgers, implying countless mysterious transactions. The air was heavy, silent. A tall figure, wearing an old-fashioned suit from the last century, stood with its back to him, in the middle of the room. When the figure slowly turned, Eris froze. Its face was completely obscured by dancing, sparkling financial numbers and characters, like ghostly fireflies, allowing him to see no human features. It extended a thin, bony hand towards him. A long, pointed finger directed straight at the ledger lying on a rotting wooden table, where his name was underlined in red ink. A cold whisper, not from its mouth but from the numbers dancing on its face, echoed in his mind, "The debt must be paid." Eris woke with a start, drenched in sweat, his heart pounding in his chest. The whisper still echoed in his ears, and he realized the ledger was no joke. Immediately after the dream, another strange event occurred. Eris discovered unusual activity in his bank account. A small sum of money, insignificant compared to his assets, but exactly a fraction of the colossal debt in the ledger, was automatically withdrawn and transferred to an unknown account. He tried to trace it through the banking system, but all information vanished, no transaction history, no recipient's name, as if the money had never existed on the digital system. A feeling of helplessness and horror enveloped him. The debt in the ledger was not just a number on paper. It was being collected, mysteriously and irreversibly, by a debt collector from another world. Eris clutched the ledger tightly, his eyes fixed on the incomprehensible numbers within. He knew his life would never be the same. The mysterious debt and inexplicable financial activity plunged Eris into an extreme state of anxiety. He tried to understand the ledger, taking it to financial experts and antique collectors. But no one could determine its origin or the meaning of the ancient numbers and symbols within. Everyone believed it was just a sophisticated scam, or a worthless old book. However, Eris knew, with a chilling intuition, that something supernatural was happening. He believed in numbers, and these numbers were revealing a horrifying truth. The haunting escalated in an unexpected way. Eris discovered that every time there was a financial transaction in his account, no matter how small, an online purchase, a bill payment, or even a cash withdrawal, a new entry automatically appeared in the ledger. It wasn't in handwriting, but grotesque, complex symbols, as if etched with something sharp onto the page. These symbols only existed for a few minutes, then mysteriously vanished, leaving the page blank as if nothing had ever been there. It seemed the ledger not only recorded, but also reflected every transaction in Eris's life, turning his very existence into an invisible record in the debt collector's books. With the instinct of a digital finance expert, Eris began to meticulously inspect his computer system, every line of code, every accounting software he used. He found a strange glitch, a security vulnerability he had never seen before. It wasn't a common virus or malware. When he tried to fix it, a chilling phenomenon occurred. The tall figure in the old suit from his dream briefly flickered on his computer screen, obscured by chaotic binary code. It stared at him with faceless, vacant eyes, then vanished in a flash. The debt collector didn't just exist in the physical world or in his dreams. It also infiltrated the digital space, into the very systems Eris believed he had absolute control over. Ethan, Eris's 10-year-old son, who was usually active and loved reading old books, began exhibiting strange behaviors. He became inexplicably fascinated by Eris's old accounting ledgers, dry numerical books he had never paid attention to before. Ethan often sat alone in his room, muttering incomprehensible numbers, complex calculations that a 10-year-old child couldn't possibly know. Occasionally, he would even draw strange financial charts on paper. Abnormal rising and falling curves, as if he were analyzing an invisible stock market. One night, as Eris was working late, he heard Ethan muttering in his bedroom. He quietly entered, and the sight before him froze him. Ethan was asleep, but he was constantly talking in his sleep, repeating the numbers and symbols Eris had seen in the mysterious ledger. Then the boy softly said, "Uncle. He wants me to record everything." Eris gently woke his son, trying to ask who he was, but Ethan only opened sleepy eyes, remembering nothing of his dream or the words he had just spoken. Eris looked at his son, a cold fear creeping into his heart. That spirit not only wanted to collect his debt, it was approaching his son, the child he loved most. The child who was passionate about old books, as if it had found a new scribe for its ledger. The debt was no longer his alone. It was spreading, threatening Eris's dearest loved ones. The ledger's influence on Ethan ignited a fire of fear and determination in Eris. He couldn't let his son become the next victim of the mysterious debt collector. With the experience of a financial auditor, Eris began his journey to find an explanation, not from numbers on paper, but from the dark corners of history and forgotten transactions. He sought out old acquaintances in the financial industry, seasoned experts who had witnessed and participated in illicit or secret dealings of the elite. He asked about ancient ledgers, about unofficial debts, about curses or strange occurrences in the financial world. However, all he received were shakes of heads, skeptical glances, and advice that he should take a vacation. Unrelenting, Eris shifted his focus to local historians, especially those who specialized in the history of old Chicago financial corporations, empires that once dominated the city in the late 19th. Early 20th centuries. He scoured old archives, dusty libraries, searching for any information about mysterious financial collapses, sudden bankruptcies, or whispered tales of strange debts. He believed that if the ledger was real, there must be some trace of it in the past. When Eris returned home after a long afternoon at the library, a chilling detail made his heart stop. He discovered a faint red ink stain, shaped like an eye, appearing on valuable objects in his house. On the old oak grandfather clock in the hallway, a tiny red eye peeked from the clock face. On Liana's precious painting hanging in the living room, that eye appeared at the corner of the frame, as if it were staring directly at him. Even on the safe containing important family documents, that eye appeared, faint but clear. It seemed these items were being marked, designated by the debt collector, for retrieval, like invisible collateral. Not just objects, Liana, his beloved wife, also began to be affected. She constantly felt exhausted, mysteriously losing energy despite having no obvious health problems. Her eyes were dark-rimmed, her face pale. She frequently had strange dreams. In her dreams, she saw herself standing before a large canvas, brush in hand, trying to finish a painting. But the lines she drew were not artistic images, but complex, twisted financial numbers and symbols, constantly changing on the canvas. She felt an invisible weight pressing down on her, an unbearable financial burden. Even though in reality Liana had no debts whatsoever. These dreams gnawed at her spirit, draining her physically and mentally. One night, as Eris was home alone, trying to piece together the fragmented information he had gathered, he heard a knock at the door. Not a normal knock, but a count, 1, 2, 3. The counting was slow, steady, echoing in the silent space of the penthouse, like a reminder that time was running out. He looked through the peephole, seeing no one outside. A chill ran down his spine. He slowly opened the door. And what he saw made him want to scream. An old, yellowed bill, detailing a debt from Eris, was nailed to the door with a rusty steel nail, still stained with dark, dried blood. It was a debt collection bill from the past, from another world, and it had found its way to his doorstep. Eris knew the debt collector was near. The old bill nailed to the door was a cold declaration: the debt collector was approaching. Eris began to see his figure more clearly, not just in dreams or fleeting illusions, but even when he was awake. He didn't speak, just stood still, observing him from a distance, or passed by the edge of his vision. The tall figure, wearing an old suit, its face obscured by dancing numbers, now frequently appeared in his office, in the corner of the living room when he was sitting next to Liana and Ethan, as a constant reminder of the debt coming due. While Eris was grappling with his personal fear, an unexpected phone call sent shivers down his spine. An old friend, who worked in finance, called with a panicked tone. He said that his bank account had suddenly been mysteriously drained, leaving no trace. More terrifyingly, he found an old ledger in his mailbox, and when he opened it, Eris Kane's name was clearly written there, along with a colossal debt. Eris froze. He realized that the debt collector was not only targeting him, but also using those around him to supernaturally collect debts, as if those people were also a part of this invisible transaction. He felt a heavy sense of guilt, as innocent people were suffering the consequences of something he couldn't control. With the clue of the ledger and the strange incidents happening to his acquaintances, Eris returned to search for old financial historians. He specifically looked for stories about famous accountants or creditors in Chicago's history. After days of digging through old documents and interviewing local history researchers, an old financial historian revealed a chilling story. He told of an accountant named Silas Blackwood, who lived in the late 19th century. Silas was a meticulous, upright man, but he was wrongly accused and lost all his assets, reputation, and family in a major financial fraud. In extreme despair, Silas committed suicide in his own office, leaving behind an old ledger and a curse about a balance sheet of justice, a vow to reclaim everything he had lost. Silas's soul could not pass on, becoming the haunting debt collector, going everywhere collecting unpaid debts, one way or another. The final horrifying truth was revealed when Eris returned home, still reeling from Silas's story. He found an old, time-yellowed letter, hidden in a secret drawer of his father's old desk. This letter, written in his late father's trembling hand, revealed a shocking secret. His father had been involved in a major financial fraud 20 years ago, an incident Eris had never known about, but it was directly linked to Silas Blackwood's downfall. The letter admitted that his father had borrowed a large sum of money from Silas without repaying it, contributing to the accountant's tragedy. The colossal debt recorded in the ledger was not Eris's. It was his father's debt, and for some reason, it had been inherited by him, becoming a burden Eris had to bear. He was not just a victim of a ghostly entity, but an heir to an ancestral sin, an invisible debt threatening to destroy everything he loved. The truth about the inherited debt and Silas Blackwood's identity as a debt collector dealt a heavy blow to Eris's mind. His fear was not just his own, but the burden of an ancestral sin. Liam, the old friend who had called about his drained account and the mysterious ledger, was the first victim of this contagious debt. He quickly became debilitated, his body gradually wasting away in a medically inexplicable way. The optimistic smile vanished from his lips, replaced by tired, vacant eyes. Liam frequently whispered strange numbers and financial charts, as if his mind was being occupied by an entity that was constantly calculating. He couldn't eat, only feeling an empty hole in his stomach, a hollowness no food could fill. Eris visited Liam in the hospital, pain and helplessness gnawing at his heart. Liam lay there, a emaciated figure. But what chilled Eris even more was a vivid red number that began to appear on Liam's body. It was Liam's exact debt amount as recorded in Eris's mysterious ledger. Initially, it was just a small spot on his chest, but gradually, the number spread, like a bizarre birthmark, covering his skin, clinging to every fiber of his flesh. As if Liam's very body was becoming a living page of the ledger. It wasn't just an ink mark, but a mark of fate, a declaration of an undeniable debt. Though doctors tried their best, no one could find the cause of Liam's death. He simply wasted away, as if completely drained of all vitality, all finances, of his body. On the death certificate, the cause of death was listed as financial exhaustion of the body, a phrase doctors could only explain as a general, inexplicable collapse, but to Eris, it was a clear indictment from the other side. Liam's name on the death certificate, which was clearly printed, was suddenly crossed out with a red ink line. Right next to it, an ancient handwritten script eerily appeared, paid. Immediately after Liam's death, a chilling phenomenon occurred in Eris's ledger. As he held the ledger, a new entry automatically appeared on the page where Liam's name had been recorded. Liam's name was rewritten, next to his colossal debt amount. And then, an ancient, faded stamp appeared vividly, stamped directly onto that entry, paid. The ledger not only recorded material transactions, but also life and death transactions. Liam's debt had been paid with his very life. And the ledger was cold proof of the debt collector's brutal justice. Eris froze. He knew this debt would continue to be collected, one by one, until Silas Blackwood's balance sheet of justice was complete. Liam's mysterious death, with the chilling, paid inscription in the ledger, poured cold water on Eris's faint hope. He knew the debt from the other side continued to demand transactions in blood, and now, the debt collector's next target was none other than his son, Ethan. Extreme fear turned into painful reality when Ethan began to show alarming symptoms. The boy started running a high fever, constantly delirious. In his delirium, Ethan incessantly muttered strange numbers and financial charts, exactly like what Liana had seen in her dreams. The boy also used a pencil to scribble complex charts on his bedroom wall. Dancing numbers, and then the figure of a man in an old suit, his face obscured by numbers, exactly the image of the debt collector Eris had seen. These drawings were not the imagination of a 10-year-old child, but messages, signs that Silas Blackwood's spirit was deeply infiltrating Ethan's mind. While Eris was desperately trying to help his son, he accidentally discovered an old voice recording on Ethan's phone. It was a short recording, only a few tens of seconds, but enough to send shivers down his spine. In the file, there was the sobbing, choked crying of a man, interspersed with the dry rustle of a ledger flipping and the steady ticking of an old pocket watch. Then a cold, resentful, and furious whispered voice echoed, "I lost everything, and so will you. No one escapes, no one." Eris recognized it as Silas Blackwood's voice, cold and full of hatred, echoing from the past. This recording was not only proof of Silas's existence, but also a declaration of his brutal purpose. Not just Ethan, Liana also began to be more severely affected. She was haunted by her son's drawings, seeing numbers dancing incessantly on her own art paintings. She felt an invisible weight pressing down on her, an unbearable financial burden. Even though in reality Liana had no debts or financial involvement, she felt her body rapidly wasting away, as if her life energy was being drained. Eris realized that Silas was not only collecting debt with money and lives, but also with his family's happiness and peace, making Liana suffer the same sense of loss that Silas had endured. As Ethan's condition became critical, Eris decided to take his son to the hospital. On the way, the horror reached its peak. The debt collector, clearly materialized in front of Ethan, standing right in the passenger seat, although Eris could only see his blurry outline in his peripheral vision. Silas said nothing, just extended a thin, bony finger pointing at Ethan, then turned to point at Eris. At the same time, a cold voice, echoing directly in Eris's mind, not from outside, but from within his own head, "Your son. The greatest debt." That voice had no threat, but was a cold, decisive statement, as if Silas was about to make a final and most painful transaction. Eris knew, he wanted Ethan, wanted to take away his only son, just as he had lost everything. Silas Blackwood's cold voice echoed in Eris's mind, "Your son. The greatest debt." That sentence was like a death sentence, tearing his heart apart. Seeing Ethan delirious, his breath weak, Eris knew he had no other choice. He had to face the debt collector, had to find a way to break this curse to save his son, no matter the cost. He decided to go to Silas Blackwood's old office, the place where, over a century ago, despair had given birth to a debt-collecting spirit. According to historical records, this was also where Silas committed suicide. Eris left Ethan being resuscitated in the hospital and Liana sobbing uncontrollably, driving away into the night. Silas's old office was in an ancient, abandoned building in downtown Chicago, where time seemed to have stood still. The heavy wooden door creaked as he pushed it open. The smell of dampness and dust assaulted his senses. The space inside was completely silent, like a tomb of time. Everything was strangely intact as it was the day Silas died: messy documents on the desk, a hardened coffee cup, and a pocket watch that had stopped ticking. As Eris stepped into the office, a chilling supernatural phenomenon occurred. The lights in the office automatically turned on, not ordinary light but a dim, pale green glow, as if from another world. The old typewriter on the desk suddenly began typing on its own, emitting dry clicks, as if recording an invisible judgment. And then, the most horrifying thing. Financial numbers and symbols began dancing in the air, sparkling like will-o'-the-wisps, forming complex, twisting charts around Eris, exactly like what Ethan had drawn in his delirium. They were the embodiment of the balance sheet of justice Silas had sworn to complete. In that ghostly space, the debt collector's figure fully materialized before Eris. Silas Blackwood stood there, tall, wearing an old suit, his face still obscured by dancing numbers and symbols, but this time, Eris sensed his physical presence, a cold aura radiating from him. He didn't attack Eris with violence. Instead, he just held out the old ledger, Eris's debt page wide open, his name underlined in blazing red ink. A voice resonated directly in Eris's mind. No longer a whisper but a clear, cold, powerful tone, "You must pay." At the price recorded. Silas's invisible gaze, from the face obscured by numbers, stared directly at Eris. He felt his will. Silas didn't need money. He wanted Eris to pay by losing his dearest loved ones, one by one, just as he had lost everything, assets, reputation, family, and finally his life. The debt collector wanted Eris to experience similar pain of loss, the pain of extreme loneliness and despair. The debt was not a number on a ledger, but the life and happiness that Silas had been robbed of. He wanted Eris to pay with what he cherished most. Eris stood there, facing the statement of fate. He understood. This debt could not be paid with money, with assets. It was a karmic debt, a curse of loss, passed down from his father. And he, the unwilling heir, stood before the final choice. To let his son and wife become the next payments, or find another way, a way not in Silas's ledger, to end this tragic chain of events. Silas Blackwood's cold declaration that the debt must be paid with life and happiness plunged Eris into extreme despair. He looked at Ethan lying unconscious in the hospital. At Liana wasting away from fear, and he knew he couldn't let them become the next payments. Silas wanted him to experience similar pain of loss, wanted him to taste the loneliness he had endured. But Eris didn't want anyone else to bear this burden. He had to find another way to pay the debt, a way not in Silas's ledger, a way to break his brutal rules. In Silas's dark office. Amidst the dancing numbers and the clicking typewriter, Eris frantically searched for an opening. He flipped through each page of the old ledger Silas was holding out, his eyes scanning the entries of debts and payments. Suddenly, he discovered a hidden page, a small piece of paper tucked deep inside the ledger, almost invisible. On it, there was a small note in Old Latin, written in faded ink, "Bloodline is transaction. Debt is inherited." Eris's heart pounded. He realized Silas's curse not only haunted those directly involved in the fraud, but also passed through the bloodline, from father to son, from generation to generation. That's why he, and Ethan, were targeted. A bold, insane, yet hopeful idea flashed in Eris's mind. If the debt was inherited through blood, then could he inherit all of it, bearing it all himself? In that desperate yet courageous moment, Eris made an offer to Silas, not with words, but with his will, with his mind transmitting directly to the invisible entity. He would be the only one to inherit the entire debt, absorbing all that Silas had lost, the pain, the loneliness, the despair, so Silas could pass on. He willingly became Silas's living ledger. An eternal record of all his suffering, but not to multiply that suffering, but to end it. Silas said nothing. His figure, which had been obscured by dancing numbers, suddenly transformed into a faint blue light. The financial numbers and symbols, which had always surrounded his face, now swirled chaotically around Eris, like a data storm. Then they slowly entered him, dissolving into every cell, every fiber of his flesh. Eris felt an excruciating pain, as if millions of needles were piercing his skin. As if millions of numbers were etching onto every cell, every blood vessel in him. It wasn't just physical pain, but the pain of loss, the pain of betrayal. The pain of anger that Silas had endured for over a century. He felt as if he was downloading a massive amount of emotional data and memories from Silas, turning them into a part of himself. The pain continued ceaselessly, but Eris endured, knowing this was the only way to save his family. When all the numbers had entered him, Silas's figure completely vanished, leaving no trace. The office returned to its terrifying silence. The lights went out, the typewriter stopped working. Only Eris stood there, exhausted, but still alive. He had accepted the debt. He had become the blood payment, a living statement of what was lost. From now on, Silas Blackwood's debt would be within him, and he would be the only one to bear it. The excruciating pain as Silas Blackwood's numbers entered Eris's body gradually subsided, leaving a cold emptiness. He had survived, but he was no longer the same person. He had accepted becoming a living ledger, a permanent repository for the debt and pain of a betrayed soul. Eris sold all his assets, abandoned his demanding auditing job in Chicago, and lived a simple, reclusive life. He moved to a small lakeside house, far from all the noise and glamour of the financial world he once belonged to. He no longer saw Silas's figure, but he felt him always by his side, within his own mind, like a silent companion, an inseparable part of his new being. Liana and Ethan, after the horrifying nightmare, made a full recovery. They remembered nothing of the supernatural events, of the ledger or the debt collector. In their memories, Liam and other friends simply passed away due to unexplained medical reasons. And Eris had suffered a severe psychological shock that changed him. They lived normal, happy lives, unaffected by the curse that had almost claimed their lives. The debt had been completely transferred to Eris. He was the only one to bear it, and his sacrifice had brought peace to his dearest loved ones. However, the existence of the debt remained imprinted on Eris's body. On his skin, financial numbers and symbols began to appear as faint birthmarks, like a mobile, living statement. They caused no pain, but constantly reminded him of the curse he carried. The strange thing was that these numbers were not static. They changed whenever Eris helped someone in financial difficulty. For example, when he volunteered to help a bankrupt family understand their loans, or when he donated a small sum to a charity supporting fraud victims, the numbers on his skin would subtly shift. A few numbers disappearing, a few new ones appearing. It was as if he was debiting or crediting Silas through his actions, personally enacting the balance sheet of justice that Silas had once yearned for. He became a silent debt collector, not through punishment, but through compassion and help. Eris understood that this was his destiny. He couldn't escape the debt, but he could change how it was paid. He spent the rest of his life researching financial frauds, the unfortunate fates ruined by opaque transactions. He became an anonymous financial consultant, helping those in need, finding justice for them. Each time he helped someone, a sense of relief spread through his mind, as if a part of Silas's burden had been lifted. He lived a meaningful life, not for fame or money, But because he was the only one who could continue Silas's work, but in a different way, a way that brought salvation instead of revenge. Eris Kane became a new debt collector. But not through punishment but through compassion and sacrifice. He spent the rest of his life helping others, especially individuals caught in the spiral of financial scams or unresolved debts. He never demanded repayment or recognition, only silently recorded the loans of fate and the payments through his good deeds. He transformed Silas Blackwood's curse into a mission. A way to atone for his father's mistakes and bring balance to the balance sheet of justice from the other side. Silas's old ledger, the item that had initiated all the horror, now rested in Eris's hands. It was no longer a terrifying object, but a tool, a living record of his atonement journey. Each time Eris helped someone escape debt, find justice, or simply offered sincere advice to someone in financial difficulty, a new entry automatically appeared in the ledger. Not ghostly symbols, but clear numbers recording a payment to Silas's balance sheet of justice, as if the old accountant's soul was accepting and acknowledging Eris's contributions. The people Eris helped would sometimes find small, old items of Silas Blackwood's in their homes, an antique brass fountain pen, a tarnished silver coin, or a rusty steel paperclip. These items would mysteriously appear in their pockets, on their desks, or lurking in drawers, even though they had never owned them. Accompanying them was a strange sense of relief. As if an invisible debt had been cleared from their lives, a spiritual burden lifted. That was Silas's legacy, passed on through Eris's actions, a sign that justice was gradually being re-established. Time passed, Eris grew old. His body weakened, but his mind remained lucid, and the numbers on his skin continued to change. One day, when Eris Kane passed away peacefully in his small lakeside house, the old ledger automatically disappeared from his room, as if its mission was complete. However, the story of the debt didn't end there. A few days after Eris's death, new, completely blank ledger, with a similarly tattered leather cover, appeared in the hands of another person. It was a young financial expert, also obsessed with justice and the injustices in the monetary world, living in a distant city. On the first page of the new ledger, Eris Kane's name was clearly written, along with a colossal debt amount, and the chilling words, payment due. There are debts written in ink. And there are debts written in souls. Do you believe that the price of justice is sometimes eternal? Now, look at your bank statement. Right now. Check the numbers. Is there a transaction you don't remember making? Or a number dancing on the screen that doesn't belong to you? Because it's very possible the bill has arrived. And you are next in the ledger. You've just heard 3 stories, 3 nightmares, and 3 moments where truth crossed the line of reason. But that was only what could be told. What no one survived to speak of still waits to be whispered. Thank you for watching Whispher Horror channel. Like, comment, and subscribe. If your mind is still intact after the final vibrations.